Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out this evening. I'm Dan Porterfield, the President and CEO of the Aspen Institute, and I'd like to welcome you to this special installment of the Institute's McCloskey Speaker Series. We are very grateful to the McCloskey family for their ongoing support of this fantastic series year in and year out. And we're here this evening to learn about an exciting new exhibition that was recently opened in our Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies, entitled Bauhaus Typology at 100. Now first, a few words of thanks. I would very much like to extend our sincere thanks to the Anne M. Korologos Trust, and to both Anne's memory and the memory of her late husband, Tom Korologos, whose memorial services were held in Washington, D.C. Just yesterday, for their support of this exhibition. As also, of course, our great thanks go to Linda and Stuart Resnick for their ongoing support and for inspiring us to celebrate this remarkable polymathic artist. So just, if we could, a gratitude to the Korologos family and to the Resnick family. And formed thanks to the vision of our trustee, Linda Resnick, and her husband, Stuart Resnick, and housed within an 8,000 square foot facility here on campus. The Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies functions as a home for the study of art, design, media, and culture. The Bayer Center is free and open to the public and produces art exhibitions, public programs, as well as educational and community-based initiatives. The mission of the center is to educate the public about the life, legacy, and expanded contexts of the artist and designer Herbert Bayer, who studied and taught at the Bauhaus before emigrating from Germany to the United States in 1938. And after relocating to Aspen, Colorado in 1946, Herbert designed our historic campus. Every byway, every walkway, every rivulet, every earthwork, every blade of grass, every shrub, every tree, the soap dishes, the buildings, everything, a total work of art, majestically conceived in such a way as both to express our ideals for dialogue that brings people together, for learning and for new possibilities, and actually to further those ideals. Herbert Bayer's majestic understanding of the designed environment made it possible for the Aspen Institute to live into his vision, even as he sought to capture the vision that the Pepkes had expressed. And these round rooms and this humility of low buildings before the majesty of nature and the spirit of the campus that, again, invites us to go deep in our thoughts, to connect to one another, to integrate mind, body, and spirit, all comes out of Herbert Bayer's vision in combination with, beautifully, Walter Pepkes, Elizabeth Pepkes. And of course, Herbert also did a lot else in this community, very much driving and helping to support the post-war revitalization of the city of Aspen, helping to inspire the artistic and programmatic vision of all sorts of entities here in Aspen, and certainly at the Aspen Institute. So one of the great things about having a Bayer Center is that we have a chance to go deep in our own heritage and understand ourselves still better and anew, which is what art so often does. And in particular, it allows us to create opportunities for the community for learning and engagement around the legacy of Herbert and the Bauhaus. And I think this idea that the community can flourish in and through art, in the discussion of art, in the contemplation of art, in the discussion about how art can be shed light on contemporary realities, bring us together. It's a collective experience. Herbert and Walter so understood that, and that became part of our understanding of ourselves as an institution in relation to one another in community here in Aspen and, of course, beyond. So in that spirit, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Rob Saunders, who is the curator of Bauhaus Typography, which is in the Bayer Center, and who is the executive director and curator of Letterform Archive in San Francisco. Rob was with us during Ideas Festival and presented, and we're really grateful for you, Rob, for rescheduling your appearance to be here at this moment, given that, as with so many of us, the COVID bug slightly interrupted your plans, and it's so great to have you here, and I'm glad you're feeling good. Rob began his career as an educator at the School of Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and Tufts University, venturing into freelance design work and agency collaborations. His entrepreneurial spirit led to establishing a distinguished book publishing venture with imprints at Alphabet Press, Picture Book Studio, Rabbit Ears Books, which was later acquired by Simon & Schuster. And prior to founding Letterform Archive in 2015, he served as a creative and marketing consultant with clients in the technology, financial, hospitality industries. The archive opened with his collection of graphic design built over 40 years and now has grown to 5 times its original size. I am now pleased to hand over the program to the Resnick Buyer Center's extraordinary executive director, Lissa Ballinger. The singular sensation has driven with her team so much innovative work in these first 2 years of our existence. Thank you, Lissa, for everything that you do. Please join me in welcoming Rob and Lissa. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for that great introduction, and welcome, everyone. We are here this evening to do an intimate deep dive into the exhibition currently on view at the Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies, entitled, you now know, Bauhaus, Typography at 100, all on loan from the Letterform Archive. So, as Dan mentioned, this event has been rescheduled, and I'm grateful that you all made the effort to come and on this beautiful evening to be here to learn about the exhibition from its curator, which is such a unique and special perspective. And I'm hoping that this evening will inspire you to come back. I'm hoping you've all been already once to the Buyer Center to see this exhibition. And I hope this will inspire you to come back many more times to see the exhibition in greater detail. It is on view. You have some time. It's on view through April of 2025. And I have to say, I was sorry that we had to reschedule the event, but I'm secretly thrilled that I get to be up here with Rob this evening for him to answer all my questions about the exhibition and to explore with him. So it ended up being a good thing. So first, welcome to Rob, who's visiting us from his home in San Francisco. And as you've heard, he is the founder and executive director of Letterform Archive, a nonprofit in the Dogpatch neighborhood of San Francisco, which is a trendy, funky, industrial part of the city that I urge you all to go visit this space when you're next in San Francisco. And I just want to give a little bit of context before I dive into questions with Rob about how this exhibition came to be. And I first saw this exhibition in San Francisco in 2022, and I was astounded by the breadth of the collection that Rob has accumulated and amassed over some 50 years, and impressed by the exhibition presentation and specifically how Letterform Archive showed the beginnings of the Bauhaus typography and the through line to typography today. And we're going to talk a lot about this, highlighting the continued relevance of the Bauhaus and how it is still relevant to contemporary typography. So Rob and I connected and began trying to scheme of how we were going to bring this exhibition to Aspen to be available to all of you, and how to travel the exhibition to make this possible. And it's really important to note that both the Buyer Center and Letterform Archive are very young institutions and organizations. And in our youthful ignorance, I don't think either of us anticipated how much of a challenge it would be to travel this exhibition of almost 200 objects to make this exhibition happen. Definitely some gray hairs for both of us, but I think we would both agree it was worth it. So that's sort of how the exhibition came to be. And now, Rob, so as Dan mentioned, Letterform Archive was founded in 2015, but your first public exhibition was not shown until 2021. And I'm hoping you'll tell us first about Letterform Archive, and then specifically why you selected Bauhaus Typography to be your first exhibition.
Okay. Well, so Letterform Archive is basically a collection of the history of written communication. And we have over 100,000 objects. Ranging from a cuneiform tablet to medieval manuscripts to early printed books, and a deep collection of 20th century graphic design, which is what this collection is a part of. But it's in the context of a collection of Dada, of futurism, of other movements in the 20th century, including graphic design up to the present. So, choosing our first exhibit, so you mentioned we opened in 2015, but we were in a facility that didn't have a gallery. And so we moved in 2020, and 2021 was when the gallery opened, and we had our first exhibition in a gallery with regular public hours and so on. And it's definitely expanded how we think about ourselves and our audience, and it's led to many wonderful things, including this. But the reason that the Bauhaus was a logical first one is because it just seemed to be a good, I mean, it's kind of a commercial choice, right? We knew there was going to be a book. The thing about Bauhaus is most people have at least heard the name, and they may know Clay and Kandinsky better than Bayer, but there's a kind of a broader art historical context that makes it a good sort of name to hang our hat on. It's also true that we had, so everything in the show, except for one piece, and everything in the book is in the collection in the archive. So there was enough to work with. And the goal of our exhibitions is primarily to show off the collection at this point. We're not traveling stuff in yet.
Yet. Who knows?
So, and we also need a bigger space. I mean, that gallery that you're looking at is it's 600 square feet. It's tiny, and so it's a completely different sort of presentation style. But I hope that answers. Yeah.
I would love for you to tell us all about the process for you of developing an exhibition catalog at the same time as developing an exhibition, because the two things are totally intertwined and linked.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had, we've been building a publishing team, and at the time that this was done, there was enough of a team in place that it really ended up being a collaboration between the publishing team working on a book and the whole team working on hanging our first exhibition. And so, as I think is probably true of most exhibition catalogs, it's the section flow in the exhibition match the chapters in the book, and but we also, because these goals are aligned and they're coming from the same material, we sort of were developing a process. It was the first one we'd done this way, but where the assets all come together for multiple use. So the captions and the wall text are also repurposed in the catalog, and there's a kind of a smooth flow. We're making it up, right? We're as you are, we're younger. So if you're looking for how this ought to be done, I'm not sure I can answer that. But I know how we did it, and it was very much the two processes in tandem. And so the editors and publisher on the publishing team had a lot to do with how the content flow was developed.
And that's a great segue into the next question, which is specifically about, and you mentioned the size of your space. So as Rob mentioned, Letterform Archive in San Francisco is 600 square feet, and we have over 4,000 square feet. So the first time Rob came to visit us, he was sort of taken aback by how large our space was, yet you were not intimidated, and you used the same sort of plan of the book in the 6 chapters in the various rooms that worked out sort of perfectly, 6 different chapters, 6 different rooms, all totally reimagined by an exhibition designer. And this is where you can really see the genius of exhibition design. So think about the first few slides and how you saw the presentation of this exhibition. And then we're going to move through just some images. Hopefully you have all seen this, of our presentation of Bauhaus typography. And just, Rob, I'd love you to elaborate about the differences.
So just having a proper opening with plenty of room to see the wall text and to have some contextual photography up front is wonderful. And then I think if you go on, so here's another thing, we couldn't do this in our space. That timeline on the wall is a really nice kind of overview of the universe that we're focused on here in the context of the Bauhaus and the history. So it shows, each of those lines is showing where it was, so from Weimar to Dessau to Berlin, who the director was, so from Gropius to Meyer to Mies, and then who the typographic master was, so from Moholy to Bayer to Schmidt, and some context around it. That content was actually developed for the book, printed in the book, didn't fit in our show. So big ups for having enough room to do that. We wish we could have done it. This is actually in the publications room. So what's in the case there is a complete set of the Bauhaus books. Actually, it's almost two sets because most of them show both a cover and an open spread.
And the whole space was designed by an amazing exhibition designer named James Williams of the Common Era. And I'm just wondering, what else do you feel like changed the experience having this larger space, et cetera?
So first of all, he designed the show in our space and also did the book design.
And then we grabbed him.
And you grabbed him and said, because he has experience. I mean, before he started working for us, he had 10 years at SF MoMA designing exhibitions and books. And so he knows how to do this. And it was great to have him kind of reimagine it. And we also, because of the complexities of traveling material and so on, and being able to have stuff clustered on the wall sort of the way that we did, some of the work in the show are facsimile prints. The material on the walls, you can tell, because if a thing is framed, it's an original object. And if it's just mounted on the wall, it's a facsimile print, which means it's exactly the same size and pretty much indistinguishable from the original in terms of the quality of the print. So I think it makes a beautiful presentation. And for those of you who've seen the show, did you know that before? Like, it's kind of an interesting.
Well, that's because the facsimiles are so extraordinary. Your reproductions it's hard. I mean, I'll be touching them, and people sort of gasp when I touch something, and I'm like, I promise this is not something from the 1926 that I'm digging my fingertips into.
Yeah, no, we put some effort into photography and reproduction quality. You see it in the books as well. And I remember we had a show in a university gallery in Oklahoma that was 100% facsimile prints on the walls. And we were the security people after the opening were just freaked out because they thought, you're walking away from all this crazy valuable stuff, and it's like, they're just prints.
Right, they're yours. I do want to also note that one of the design things that James Williams did was he punctuated each room and each chapter with these large, bold circles, which was a wonderful connection point and also differentiation between the different chapters. And you can see it as well in this image. Really extraordinary exhibition design, and such a privilege to be able to see in two different spaces how much the exhibition changed, how much the objects are different in different spaces as well.
Yeah. Well, and there's actually a few more objects that are in this show but weren't in the book or our show, just because we
accumulated.
Yeah, we've continued.
And you're still collecting, right? Is that a true statement?
That is a true statement.
Yeah.
We're
100,000 and growing. that is just an unfathomable number.
Well, books aren't that big.
Yeah, well,
and like print ephemera, stuff like that, it's not very big. 100,000 objects is not as crazy as it sounds. It's a lot to keep track of.
Sounds like a lot to me. So I want to begin exploring actual objects in the exhibition with you, Rob. I feel like this is such a privilege to have you here, but Before we do that, one of the things that this exhibition does so successfully is to show the arc of the Bauhaus and its expressionist beginnings to its more minimalist endings. And so we don't lose anyone. Forgive me, I'm going to do the briefest introduction to Bauhaus you have ever heard in your entire life in 2 minutes or less, but I just want to make sure that there isn't anyone in the audience that is like, I don't know what Bauhaus actually is. So in its most simple form, the Bauhaus is a modernist art school founded in 1919 by Walter Gropius, who was an architect. And it's really important to understand the particular history of that moment. So 1918 is the end of World War I, and Germany had suffered a devastating and unexpected defeat. And in that ruin emerged the Weimar Republic and many new, radically interesting, different revolutionary ideas, and one of those was the Bauhaus School, which was state-funded, and they hired Walter Gropius to take on this project, and Gropius accepted the challenge with zeal, and he opened the Bauhaus, which literally means house of building or house of architecture, with a total reconsideration of what an art school was. And that doesn't sound that radical or revolutionary, but it really was. And so what he did is he said previously art schools had been about copying old master teachers. This art school was literally about creating a new man for a new, more humane society. So it was much more than a typical art school, and the principles of the Bauhaus included rethinking the way that art was integrated into all aspects of life. So prior to the Bauhaus and other movements of the time, art had been really relegated to the wealthiest classes. Now suddenly art should be accessible to all people. It should be functional, practical. It should be imbued in really basic principles and down to the most essential elements. And one thing that was so important to remember about the Bauhaus was that Gropius believed that there should be no hierarchy in the arts. There should be no difference between applied art, craft, commercial art, or fine art, that they should all be on one level playing field, and it encouraged experimentation and creativity. So this radical art school, like Rob mentioned, that had 3 different locations, was shut down in 1933, the same year that Hitler became chancellor. The Bauhaus was way too Bolshevist, way too communist, way too Jewish, way too revolutionary, and it was shut down. And the master teachers and the students, which, by the way, the total students was about 1,200 people that were actually at the Bauhaus during this very short 14-year period of time. So it was shut down in 1933, and many people emigrated all around the world. Most basic, quick introduction to Bauhaus ever, but hopefully that gets everyone on the same page.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you. So one of the most enduring legacies of the Bauhaus was its new approaches in educational pedagogy or teaching. And Rob, I'd love you to talk about specifically the Lionel Feininger woodcut, but also that really transformative educational pedagogy.
So the piece on the left of the slide here is the manifesto of the Bauhaus that was published in 1919 when it opened, or around the time before it opened even. And it was, I think, mainly written by Gropius. It has about 4 or 5 pages of text inside. And it really lays out some of the basic pedagogical ideas that carried all the way through. So it was, in some sense, well conceived from the beginning. The diagram came a few years later, and this is an English translation of it for convenience, but obviously it was in German. And it talks about the basic course and the foundational study across disciplines, which was a really important aspect of what they were doing, trying to break down barriers. So there was specialization, but there was also a drive to collaborate and to treat the arts and crafts equally. Which I think had a lot to do with how the graphic design evolved. So, and that particular sort of breaking down of barriers is still influential. Some other things about, and actually the pedagogy changed a fair amount during the 14 years based on who the primary teachers were, especially in the preliminary course. And so there was a bit of an arc in that as well. And, but the core ideas, the core pedagogical ideas are still influential. They're still powerful today.
And I just want to read this quote that you said. There are things about the Bauhaus that will endure forever, and there are things that have become tropes. But it was influential because it had a unified pedagogical purpose. It espoused one core knowledge of art and design, and while specialization was encouraged, so was cross-disciplinary exploration. It's still the right idea, I think. The pedagogical openness is where the juice is still. And then...
I'm not going to disagree with that.
You're like, I'm pretty smart, actually. And then I'd love you to speak about Johannes Itten, this picture of Johannes Itten on the left, and the early expressionist beginnings of the Bauhaus, which are so different than what we now think of when we think of the Bauhaus.
Yeah, so for people who sort of know the Bauhaus work in general in various disciplines, but especially in design and graphic design, what you probably think of is a very clean modernist style with sans serif typefaces, lots of lowercase, maybe no uppercase, that was a thing for a while. Asymmetry, lots of white space, use of photography and photomontage with typography. And those aspects of Bauhaus typography and graphic design emerged later in the school. What was happening at the beginning was very different, and the stuff that we're going to see here is way more expressionistic, and it's not, in fact, I think for a lot of people, it may be a bit of a surprise, like walking into the first room of that show, because it's not what you'd think of as Bauhaus typography and graphic design. And so Itten was a major part of that, but the other real piece of it is that as long as they were in Weimar, which was from 1919 to 1924 or 5, they did not have a type workshop. There was no type that they could set on site, and there were no proof presses or ways to print type and graphic design. There were presses. There were lithographic presses and taglio presses.
It's an art printing.
There was art printing. They taught printmaking. And so a lot of this early graphic design is actually printed by woodcut, lithograph, even sometimes in taglio, and which meant that there was no type. All the lettering is done by hand.
Just like the piece that we're seeing here.
Well, the piece that we're seeing here is from an early print portfolio put out by the Bauhaus. They had 5 of them, I think. And this is in one of the early ones. This is lithography, which means it was done on the stone in reverse. And but it's a piece of graphic design. It's just there's no type. The next slide is one of the greatest pieces in the show. Is a book by Itten called Utopia. These two, actually, both of these slides are not by Itten, and they're by women. So the cover design is Margaret Thierry Adler, who was one of his students, and the compositions of the letterpress pages were done by Friedel Dicker. And so he worked with a lot of collaborators, especially in this book. And in this case, both of these were women, and Friedel Dicker had a pretty great career. In fact, there was a monograph recently about her. But this early work is very sort of expression. It's more. It has more in common with German expressionism than it does with modern typography, in a sense.
And one thing that this exhibition also does so well is to highlight a lot of Bauhaus artists that many of us had never heard of. And I think the whole staff of the Beyer Center has gotten really interested in Friedel Dicker, who unfortunately, I'll tell this story really briefly, but please add in. This is an extraordinary story. So she was a student of Johannes Itten, and then she was Jewish. She was put in a concentration camp, and she ended up teaching art in the concentration camp to children. And she saved somehow about 4,000 pieces of the children's art, which is now preserved in the Jewish Museum in Prague. She was sent to Auschwitz, and she was killed in 1944 or 45. And one of her, or several of her students, are actually some of the people who started the art therapy movement. So just an amazing, again, through line, which I had never heard of. I think many of us had never heard of, that we learned through this exhibition. And she was the one who did this. She was an extraordinary typesetter. This piece on your right-hand side.
Yeah. And then another part of the book is Itten's analyses of old master compositions, which look like this. So this spread actually has a tissue overlay with the line work on it, which is basically analysis. The black and white print under the tissue overlay is of an old master painting. And so this is a kind of a technical analysis of the composition. And somehow this is the explanation.
Yeah.
Talk about expressionistic, but also think about, like, 80s punk flyers and early digital work. So one of the things that's interesting about this exhibition, and that I'm excited about for both the show and the book, is that we have, in our collection, we have a lot of this early work because we like it pretty much as well as the modernist stuff. And we also see that more recent echo of this work, and a lot of it. So whereas the more modernist Bauhaus typography is feeling a little dated now. So it's interesting how these things come around in cycles in art history, right? But yeah, this is an amazing book, and there's a video flip through of.
I was about to say that one of the great things about the exhibition is this is open to a page, but you can't really see what we're looking at here. So in the exhibition, you can actually see every single page. Rob is flipping through it, a really neat element of the exhibition. So in 1923, there is actually, do we want to talk about this?
No, this is right. Yeah, this is perfect, because this is actually, so these are 3 of 20 postcards, invitations to the 1923 exhibition. And the 23 exhibition was required by the state to sort of, for the Bauhaus to show what it was doing and justify its existence. And the funny part about it is that it failed, and they pulled the funding and had to move. So,
which ended up being a success.
Which ended up being a success because they moved to Dessau. They got a new building. They got a typographic workshop. They got I think in general an improved situation. But the city of Weimar looked at the exhibition and said, not good enough. You got to go. So these postcards are one of the most amazing things in the show, though. They are standard postcard size, but they're printed by stone lithography. So each artist was working on the stone in reverse. All the lettering all the type is hand lettered. And as you see with the one on the left, which is Paul Klee, it's really sort of entirely experimental. But that was the thing about the Bauhaus. You have 20 postcards. Some of them are done by Bayer. So Maholi's in the middle, Bayer's on the right here. So graphic designers and typographic masters, people that were actually doing that, did some of these cards, but only about half of them. The rest were by Kandinsky and Klee and Feininger, and other people are mainly known as fine artists, but they all did this graphic design work too. And it all kind of fed into the melting pot of what was going on there. So
just a bit of context, all of these postcards, which you can see en masse, the Letterform Archive, Rob put them in a frame together, which was wonderful to see them all together. And they're all promoting the same event, which was this exhibition that was put on by the Bauhaus School in 1923 to prove what they had done in the early years to the state. So all of these artists were showing their individual expression through these amazing postcards, and to see them all together is just an incredible privilege.
Yeah, it's a beautiful set. And the 2 by Herbert Bayer, this is 1923, at that time he was a student. So he became the typographic master 2 years later.
Another great point is that Gropius didn't just invite master teachers to do these. There were 14 different artists, even though there were 20 total postcards. Right. There were only 14 artists, and it wasn't just master teachers. Herbert Bayer was a student. Other participants were students as well.
Yeah. So this slide kind of shows what I was talking about. Like, this is what what most people would probably think of if they have some awareness of it as Bauhaus graphic design and typography. So, use of abstract rules, asymmetric arrangements, lots of white space. This, and also, so the thing on the right is actually a syllabus or something. It's a pedagogical piece that would have been printed in the in-house print shop. This one was designed by Bayer. And so it's an example now of what they had in Dessau, which is they could print things like this. And they actually did work in that workshop for organizations and community. They did posters and printed matter as commercial commissions as many of the workshops then were doing. So ceramics and glass and metal were all creating products for sale. And the type workshop and the type and advertising, it was called, did commercial work. And then the sort of thing that cemented this style and spread it around the world was the publications that they did. So they did, on the left here is actually the prospectus for the Bauhaus book series, but they also did a journal, which is...
And let me just say something really quickly too, because this heralds a really important moment in the Bauhaus, where Johannes Itten, who Rob has been speaking about, leaves, and Laszlo Moholy-Nagy comes in, and literally Gropius changes the tagline of the school. I mean, this is so crazy to do. So the original tagline was Art and Craft, a New Unity, and he changes it. He changes the whole prospectus of the school. It's now Art and Technology, a New Unity. He's interested in mass production, in getting and broadcasting messaging out at this time. It's a really formidable change at this time in the Bauhaus.
So it led to the publication of a journal, and we're looking here at 2 issues of the journal. The first issue in the first volume, the first volume was designed by Moholy-Nagy, so the large Bauhaus and the one that's from the first volume of the journal. The one on the right is the first number of the second volume, designed by Bayer, who basically took an issue of volume 1 and did a still photograph, and that's it. That's the cover. That's a kind of a magical thing, and it was really new in graphic design at the time, but it's still being done. Like it is a thing. There's just the idea that you don't always have to overlay the type, that if you can complete the message with a photograph in context just by itself, it's a kind of a magical thing, and that's a very famous piece of graphic design. So the journal ran for 3 or 4 volumes. The third, interestingly, the art direction of it, first year was Moholy, second year was Bayer, third year was Juice Schmidt, and those were the 3 typographic masters in the order that they led the workshop. They also had a book series, and so
let's just talk about this really quickly. Again, this was so important to broadcasting the message of the Bauhaus because this had a global reach. This magazine was so important. And one of the eureka moments that I had about this exhibition and that I learned through Rob that was so important, that the Bauhaus didn't just have a really radical message that they were broadcasting, but they used the tools, they used the graphic design, they used the publishing in order to disseminate that message. And it was through things like this unbelievable magazine that was produced quarterly that they got the messaging of what was actually happening at the Bauhaus out to the world, as well as the Bauhaus books.
Yeah, so the journal and the books were both, I think, substantive products in a way, but also really marketing avenues.
Propaganda,
because, yeah, they were propaganda, and they were both successful. The book series, there were 14 in the end, although there is a prospectus somewhere along the way that lists 30 titles, so they were ambitious, they didn't quite get there. But they're pretty great, and they're a mix of, so the 2 that are shown here are Mondrian, who's the Dutch de Stijl artist, and there's a Mondrian book and there's a Van Dosch book, and the one on the right is Moholy's book on typography it's really photography, film, and
painting.
Yeah, it's a lot of, well, we don't have stuff inside. But so the books are, I think about half of the books are written by Bauhaus masters and the others from other contributors. The style was set by Moholy, and the bindings were consistent through all 14. And the sort of typographic style of the covers and the interiors is very distinct. And there were a few other designers here and there, but it was mostly Moholy.
I want to read this quote from Ellen Lupton, who wrote the foreword in Rob's book catalog. She said, "Typography was a creative field and a tool for survival, as graphic design enabled the production of publications, posters, and exhibitions that told the Bauhaus story, sold its products," which was really important, and kindled its transcendent status.
Yeah, that's right.
So now we're just going to talk about a few of Rob's favorite objects in the exhibition, starting with Bayer's Universal Experimental Alphabet.
Yeah. This is really an amazing thing. So this came to us so recently that it was in our exhibition in San Francisco, but it didn't arrive until after the book had gone to press, so it's not in the book. But there are 3 original pieces of original art of Herbert Bayer's universal alphabet concept, which was basically a simplified version of the alphabet, no lower and uppercase, kind of a unified or biform, which was intended to make things simpler. It didn't really take hold, but there were several versions of that idea that came out of the Bauhaus, and his so-called universal alphabet was probably the best known. There are a total of 3 boards in existence. 2 of them are at Harvard with the Gropius collection, and this one came to the Letterform Archive a few years ago. So it's an amazing artifact. It's actually reproduced in some of the other things in the show, like from the 30s and 40s. And it's fun to look at up close. I'm not sure how much you can see here, but certain letters are like pasted on, and there's white out.
Experimental.
Yeah, it's experimental, and there are corrections. You can see the compass points in the middle of the circles and stuff like that.
And this universal alphabet really was a model for so many other typefaces that came after it. Another thing, I've learned so much from Rob in this exhibition, all of us have, but really there haven't actually been that many actual typefaces that were produced during the Bauhaus. What the Bauhausers did was they took, existing typefaces and then radically reimagined them. But this one specifically, this geometrically inspired, rational, experimental alphabet, which was never turned into an actual typeface, was
in the 60s.
It was. I did not know that.
Yeah, there's a typeface called Bauhaus that was drawn by Ed Bengat, and it was a popular advertising face.
So not during the Bauhaus.
It doesn't look exactly like this,
Right.
but it's probably closest to the Bayer. It has the N and the, it has many characteristics of this.
But this has ended up influencing so many other typefaces that we use on a daily
Absolutely.
basis.
And interestingly, so the sort of key branding face for the exhibition in the book is called Jacques Schmid, which is kind of a portmanteau of Just Schmidt, but it wasn't produced as a font until 2019 when Adobe released 5 or 6 fonts that were based on research from lettering and other things in the Bauhaus and produced by current type designers and students. So that branding face was produced at that time. It's based on lettering by Just Schmidt.
Next object, another maquette by Herbert Bayer.
This is fun. This is a gouache maquette, which means sketch, and it's for the 50th anniversary poster, which appears next to it in the show, but it's a completely different design. It says number 2 on it, of how many we don't know, but it's always fun to see a sketch that differs from the final, and to see what other directions might have been taken. This is a fun thing. So this happens to be the thing in the show that I acquired the longest ago. Is that a proper?
I got you. We got you.
I used to put like pencil codes and everything, so I know exactly when I bought it and for how much. It was in 1981, and it was for $3 and something. It would now probably be worth, I don't know, 2,500 or so. It's the first specimen of the Futura typeface, and
Which everyone is familiar with the Futura typeface.
yeah, and it's a beautiful thing inside. It's also really a kind of a great example of what in the show is called new typography, towards a new typography, which was kind of the typographic environment in Europe that the Bauhaus was in. But the Futura typeface actually wasn't used in Bauhaus work because it came later. It didn't come out until 27, 28, and I don't think they ever really used it at the Bauhaus. But much of the work from the late 20s, early 30s that is in that style and very sort of Bauhaus-like was done in Futura, and so the sort of backward view thinks of Futura as a Bauhaus typeface. In many ways it is. It sort of epitomizes some of the design ideas, and it's certainly the most durable of the sans serifs from that era. And then, so that new typography is basically, there's a section in the show which is around the Bauhaus, and very specifically people who came to the Bauhaus to speak or had a correspondent relationship or something like that. So this is the work of Karl Teige from Prague, who spoke at the Bauhaus and was a friend and collaborator. The other people in that section are like Jan Schickold and Walter Dexel, and they were associated with the Bauhaus one way or another, and doing in some ways similar work. The modernist typographic style had broad, it spread quickly in Europe of the time, and the Bauhaus was just one sort of fount of that. This is a really fun piece. This is from the late 20s. It's like maybe 1928, and it's Japanese. I'm not sure there's no Japanese on it, but this is the cover of a Japanese book, which is basically a ripoff of a layout in Moholy-Nagy's Bauhaus book. It's Bauhaus book format, and the interior is kind of like a compendium of the Bauhaus books. So
it shows the international reach of the Bauhaus.
By the late 20s in Japan, they were thinking about Bauhaus.
And I want to get to some audience questions, but before we do, I have to ask this question. You can see this written on this Ulm catalog, and Rob will talk a little bit about the Ulm school, but is the Bauhaus relevant today? And I love this quote that comes from Rob's catalog. Every generation seems to discover, praise, and destroy the Bauhaus. So I'd love you to speak to that.
That's true.
Yeah, it is true.
Well, it's true, and I think it's true for many movements in art history, that they come in and out of favor, and there are sort of long arc cycles of echoes and inspiration. Specifically about this artifact, so Ulm was a school that, as a whole, was kind of an echo of the Bauhaus idea, and Max Bill, who was at the Bauhaus, was one of the co-founders of it. It was in northern Germany in the 60s. It also was shut down for political reasons early. It only lasted about a decade, but it was very influential. And because Bill was there and because the Bauhaus was still something everybody was thinking about, this is a copy of the Ulm Journal from the late 60s with the question right there, is the Bauhaus relevant today? And they've been, we're still asking the same question, right? It's just a different, in every generation, it's a slightly different question and answer. I think it's most influential in its pedagogy because of how it opens the mind and the practice to creativity. Some of the tropes of design that ended up flowing from Bauhaus graphic design and typography into mid-century American graphic design and branding look a little dated now, but
it will return.
Well, I think it'll return, and actually the more expressionistic stuff came on strong in the 80s and 90s, and is still kind of, there's a lot of in graffiti culture and other things, a much sort of denser, more expressionistic approach to the page. This is an Aspen story. So in 1988, Tokunobu Igarashi, who was a Japanese designer, was speaking at the Aspen, not the Ideas Festival, Design.
IDCA, International
IDCA.
Design Conference of Aspen.
International Design Conference. And as a keepsake, he made this booklet, which is that is on a wall in the show, and also the original's in a case. And what he did is he took Bayer's Universal Alphabet and did isometric projections of it. So this is Bayer's Universal Alphabet, reimagined by Igarashi and printed in fluorescent inks.
So cool.
And it's a beautiful thing.
It's an amazing thing to have in our
And
exhibition.
it's an Aspen story, it's a Bayer story, it's a Bauhaus story, it's so many things. This is a spread from Emigre magazine in the early 90s, and it's an example of what was going on in the 80s and 90s with punk and grunge and early digital work, and also graffiti culture as a kind of a through line to all of that, which is back to a way denser, more expressionistic thing. And you see it in graphic design too. So it's coming around a bit more in the last decade to the cleaner, more open pages again. But there was a time in the 90s and the aughts when if a page wasn't full, you weren't happy. It had a very kind of dense and vibrant kind of energy.
And I love this quote in your book also in the catalog. The Bauhaus idea encompasses broader methods of experimentation, simplification, and imagination that are as applicable to today's digital era as they were to the machine age. It's a very great, interesting quote. Finally, last image, and then we'll open up questions to all of you, to the audience, but I'd love you to end with this last piece.
Yeah, this is a really great piece. This is from an Ecuadorian designer. And I'm not going to...
Vanessa
Can you do it? I know it's Tenitzere.
Zuniga Tenitzere.
Zuniga Tenitzere. And her work, her practice has a lot of this aesthetic, which shares so much with the Bauhaus, the kind of gridded geometric lettering, the primary colors, even the composition. It's a bit denser, but it echoes some of the Bauhaus invitations and things. And when we talked to her, there's actually a brief interview with her on our website. There's a video where she talks about this piece, but also just her practice and how she realized at some point that the indigenous culture that she comes from, the colors and patterns kind of align with the Bauhaus. There's an overlap and an intersection. And so she's been kind of dancing around that mashup for a while, and this piece is an example of that.
All right. Thank you so much, Rob. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
I know we just covered a lot. Hopefully you all feel like you understand so much more, and hopefully you're going to dash to the Bayer Center tomorrow to see the exhibition again. We are open 12 to 5, Tuesday through Sunday till the end of the music festival. Does anyone have any questions? Herbie Molnar, right in the front.
Yes.
Thank you. Did the Bauhaus in any way give birth to the Art Deco movement? And if so, could you talk about what that influence was?
Actually, they were pretty independent. Art Deco, it probably flowed more from the Nouveau styles around the turn of the century. So most notably Wiener Werkstatt from Vienna. But it doesn't really, it's interesting because that last piece maybe does look a little bit deco, but I don't really see too much overlap there between deco and, like the height of deco would be, for example, Cassandra is a poster artist that you may know. It's much more illustrative and stylized and ornamental. So it's kind of a different thread, I would say.
Anyone else? Bernie.
You know everybody in the room by name, do you?
It's Aspen.
Apparently that's
Thank
great.
goodness.
We're all planted. I'm sorry, this is a bit of a buzzkill, but you've spoken about many of these movements and schools that were that flourished and then were shut down. In light of the Heritage Foundation's 2025 plan coming our way, do we fear for places like the Aspen Institute?
Oh my goodness, Bernie. Oh my goodness. You take that one.
I don't know how to answer that. I'm not, I'm just a visitor here.
Bernie, I am gonna be the voice of hope. I mean, what Rob has been saying is that somehow all of these things are still being rediscovered and are still emergent. So that's my answer. Maybe it will be dissolved or disavowed for some period of time, but no, it's going to survive and thrive.
Oh, yeah.
Any less scary questions? Over here, maybe.
Hi, I do have a question a little bit about the history. Was it ever an offshoot of Dada? Bauhaus, I mean, especially with like the beginnings of the kind of that collage and photography. I'm just curious.
Well, it's interesting. I think in the early expressionistic work, you can see echoes of, for example, Kurt Schwitter's collage work, which is sort of the essence of German Dada. But really, in the graphic design, not so much. Dada was really about breaking rules, and the Bauhaus sort of classical clean typography is very sort of rules-driven in a way. Yeah, I mean it can be. It certainly isn't Dada, because Dada would be like everywhere, and Dada graphic design is amazing and wonderful, and we have a decent collection of it, but it's quite different. What I will say, there was a commonality though. Dada, Bauhaus, the Italian Futurists, the Russian constructivists, especially the ones that lived in Paris, they were all famous for their parties. They threw fabulous parties, costume balls. I realized it when I was doing a curator tour earlier this year of the Bauhaus show. There's about a half a dozen party invitations in the show, and they're pretty,
Elaborate. Fun.
Well, the Metallica Fest, where you dress up in tinfoil or something. I don't know, and the invitations are printed on metal foil. And it's true of all these movements. The Dada parties were apparently the craziest, but so there's a kind of a countercultural thread, and the Bauhaus had some of it, but it doesn't show up in the typographic style so much.
2 more questions. Right here, please.
Hi, I wondered about the popularity of Bauhaus today in Germany, and is there any interest in bringing this wonderful show there?
Great question.
Well, yeah, it's funny because our books are distributed worldwide, and this book sells really well in Germany, which I'm very happy about because
it's not in German.
It's not in German, but it's also, there was a lot of publishing around the anniversary, but not so much about graphic design, and so I guess we've kind of found a hole. But it's revered in Germany, and there's a Bauhaus Institute and archive and several large collections of it, and I think it's sort of revered as part of their art history and culture. But they're not recycling the design work any more than the rest of the world at this point.
One final question right in the middle back there. I can barely see you guys, so I hope I'm getting everyone. I can't see you.
That's okay.
Is that Gail? Wait, you have your mic right there. Oh, it's Gail. Hi, Gail.
Hi. I wanted to ask you about the relationship of the Bauhaus typography and the near ubiquitous Helvetica, because it seemed to me they are related in many ways.
Well, I'm pretty far down the graphic design rabbit hole, so for me they're real different. Helvetica epitomizes the late mid-century Swiss style, which is a major thing. And Helvetica was a typeface designed in Switzerland and became sort of emblematic of a whole couple of decades of very influential design coming out of Switzerland, including, and this is a little similar actually, two of their schools in Zurich and Basel, the design schools, but especially the Basel school. Lots of Americans went there in the 60s and 70s, and it was very influential. They brought back the Swiss style, and that was a kind of a shift away from sort of Bauhaus style mid-century typography. Have I confused you enough? But yeah, I can understand why, being a sans serif and often the layouts are kind of stark and similar, it would seem, but it's actually it's from a different movement, and it's a nuance. It's sort of an echo in some ways, but also quite different in others.
Well, thank you so much, Rob, for joining us.
Thank you.
And for creating this extraordinary exhibition. We're so happy. And please go visit Letterform Archive, but first go visit the Buyer Center. Have a wonderful evening.